Now we're going to talk about storytelling with data before moving on to look at some common ways that charts are manipulated. So remember from that first video, that chart I showed you showing the sheer volume of data. And recall that all the, you know, millions of terabytes of data being generated per day, right? So we have all this data being generated, and often to make sense of it, we need to use a narrative format so that it's memorable, it's actionable, and we're not lost in the weeds, scratching our heads, wondering how these different charts we see fit into a bigger picture. So incorporating data visualizations in stories can make data more engaging, understandable, and memorable. Narratives simplify complex trends. They make them easier to understand and to interpret. And stories are persuasive. And this is something that's especially true that I learned reading web design literature and learning a little bit about consumer behavior, is that videos are really important, and making videos that use story arcs, even using the hero's journey as a format, even though it seems corny and overused and all that, it actually goes a long way in persuading people to take action. That action being to start that subscription or buy that t-shirt or that skateboard, right? So elements of a data story: a clear storyline that's guiding your audience. So we have all these charts. We need to have a storyline that's guiding through the story. It's guiding through what we're looking at. Visualizations need to support our narrative and highlight key insights. So I'm going to share this PowerPoint later, and I encourage you to click this link and actually scroll through this website. It's an interactive story giving you statistics while showing you infographics on the region pertaining to the statistics. And this is so that once we walk through that story, we have a call to action at the end. So an example Pew Research article I found that's telling the story of how smartphone use is perceived by teachers and students in public schools amidst challenges that teachers have been reporting with cell phone use in K through 12. So when we read this, high school teachers are especially likely to see cell phones as problematic. About 7 in 10, 72%. So you see how we're describing the data that's listed on the right. Say that students being distracted by cell phones is a major problem in their classroom, compared to 33% of middle school, 6% of elementary school teachers. And if we kept reading, we would get to read more about the students' perspectives on this. And one of the challenging parts of this is that many students and parents feel like they don't want cell phones to be banned because they like being able to communicate, especially in the context of a potential emergency, right? But this data can help us understand why are schools making the policies they are? Why are teachers advocating for certain policies? And perhaps even why are students and parents against policies? How do they feel about this? We can use that data, we can describe what's happening. And then we could even do things, Pew Research doesn't do this. They kind of present the facts and let you make up your mind. But we could even make recommendations based on the data we're seeing from teachers and students looking at their perspectives. These policies seem like the best for balancing concerns of quality education and respecting people's privacy, their property, and their desire to have communication. So what are some best practices when we're storytelling with data? Well, number one, keep it simple. Don't overwhelm your audience. Sometimes people present PowerPoints and they like to show, you know, graphs that have 20 bars on them. They'll have 50 bullet points describing a single chart on one slide, and it's just too dense. It's too overwhelming. So keep it simple. If you have really dense charts, maybe they need to be broken up into several charts. And maybe you need to work on summarizing the information and getting the big trends and not getting lost in the weeds. Use consistent visuals. Make sure your visualizations are clear, and that they're in line with the narrative. And lastly, you want to focus on the story, not the data. The data should support your story and not the other way around. I wouldn't be able to understand half of the research I read if it weren't for the fact that it has a good progression from the intro to the discussion at the end and the conclusion. When I look at the charts, sometimes it's difficult to get the overall picture. Some researchers are better about this than others. But the point is, we want to focus on the story and not just the charts. Now let's talk about, when we talk about interpreting charts, how can we misinterpret them? Or what tricks might people use intentionally or unintentionally to cause you to misinterpret charts? Well, number one is what we call omitting the baseline. And this was a tip I gave earlier, not to necessarily, you want to start at zero, especially with bar charts. So on the left-hand side, you can see that it looks like group A is grossly different from groups B and C. But then we see that the y-axis was actually stretched out because they started counting at 50. And if we started counting at 0, we can see that, the difference between groups A and B and C are really not that great. And then we can manipulate the y-axis in other ways. So what they've done is manipulated the y-axis by stretching it beyond what they needed. So they could have cut it off at about 15 or 20, given the trend being shown. But instead, they chose to make the y-axis scale by tens all the way up to 40. And you can see how that flattens the line. Whereas on the right-hand side, we can see that there's actually a steeper trend going on. We can also cherry pick information. So you remember when I talked about we don't want to just omit values from certain months or weekdays, or remove values where we have zeros or where we have outliers. And that's because we'll be kind of falsifying the trends that we're showing. So on the left, it looks like, imagine if this was a stock and we say, look at the growth over the months of May to August. It looks stellar. I want to invest. Sign me up. But then if you see kind of this bigger trend going on where I haven't omitted data, you might say, oh, you know what? Now that I have more data that's not just cherry picked from this small window of 4 months, maybe I am not so interested in investing now. Using the wrong graph. So we said pie charts are good for comparing parts of a whole, but they're not good for really visualizing the differences. Bar charts let us see, they're more sensitive to letting us see the difference in values. And so that's why we're better able to compare, using the bar chart on the right, the differences in the team's percentages versus that one on the left. Like if we're looking at this on the left, I'm like, what is the difference between A and B, right? It's easier to see on the right. And then lastly, we have conventions. So this is just one convention, that we use darker colors to represent higher density. And you can see that on the left, that's reversed. So the lowest density, what is this, individuals per kilometer, it makes it look like the states with a lower density of people are in the states that actually have the higher density. Whereas on the right, we're sticking to that convention of darker colors for higher density. So it's important to try to use those conventions because they're intuitive. I don't have to mentally make that adjustment to say, oh, look, I need to reverse the way I'm thinking about this. I hope you'll take away a few useful points from this. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy your week.